I stared at my phone, the banking app's balance frozen at 0.20. 15 years of marriage dissolved into a digital emptiness that felt like a slap across my face. The timestamp mocked me, 3:47 a.m., while I had been sleeping peacefully beside him. My husband Richard had drained our joint accounts with the precision of a surgeon and the conscience of a snake. "Everything okay, darling?" His voice oozed artificial concern as he entered our kitchen, Hermes tie perfectly knotted against his crisp white shirt. The same hands that had held mine in the hospital when we lost our baby had just digitally gutted our financial life. Before. We jump back in. Tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I forced a smile. Muscle memory from years of playing the supportive wife. Just checking our accounts. Seems there might be some mistake. "Banking glitch, probably," Richard replied, not meeting my eyes as he poured his imported coffee into the mug I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. "I'll call them from the office." He wouldn't, of course. We both knew that. Just as we both knew what the subtle shifting of boxes in his closet meant last week. Just as we both recognized the scent of unfamiliar perfume that occasionally clung to his custom suits. Just as we both pretended not to notice the late-night texts that made him smile in ways I hadn't caused in years. But emptying our accounts, that was the declaration of war I hadn't expected so soon. "Don't forget, dinner with the Palmers tonight," he reminded me, kissing my cheek perfunctorily before heading toward the door. "Claire's been asking about you." Claire Palmer, his law partner's wife and my supposed friend. The woman who looked at me with barely concealed pity during our last dinner, when Richard's hand lingered too long on their waitress's back. "I remember," I replied softly, my fingers already typing a different message on my phone. Not to our banks. That would be pointless. But to Eleanor Hudson, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Manhattan, whose number I'd saved 3 months ago when I found the first hotel receipt. As the door closed behind him, I allowed myself a momentary smile. Richard clearly thought he was several moves ahead in a game where I hadn't even seen the board. Poor Richard. Always underestimating the quiet wife who gave up her career to support his, who organized his partner's dinners and remembered their children's birthdays, who nodded appreciatively at his mansplaining of her former profession. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He had no idea what was coming. My phone buzzed with a response from Eleanor. 9 a.m., my office, bring documentation. I walked to our home office, Richard's office technically, though I was the one who kept it organized. Behind his pretentious collection of leather-bound legal volumes that he'd never read was a small safe. The combination was our wedding. Date, a sentimental choice for a man who had clearly abandoned sentiment. Inside wasn't much. Our marriage certificate, property deeds, insurance policies. I took everything, sliding them into my leather portfolio. Then I moved to the painting. On the adjacent wall, a hideous modern piece Richard had insisted was important. Behind it was my safe. My combination wasn't our anniversary, or my birthday, or anything Richard might guess. It was the day I stopped believing his lies. March 18th, 3 years ago, when a late-night call from his office was answered by the sound of a woman's laughter and the unmistakable clink of hotel ice in glasses. My safe contained the documentation of a different life, a parallel financial existence Richard knew nothing about, bank statements for accounts in my name only, investment, portfolios that had quietly grown while Richard thought I was just managing our household budget. Records of the consulting work I'd been doing anonymously for the past 5 years, filtered through an LLC registered in my maiden name. While Richard saw me as a decorative accessory to his successful life, I'd been methodically preparing for the moment when the mask would finally drop. I just hadn't expected him to accelerate the timeline by emptying our accounts. I dressed carefully, choosing a conservative navy sheath dress that made me invisible rather than remarkable. Richard liked me noticeable at his events, the elegant, decorative wife who enhanced his professional image. Today, I needed to be the opposite of what he'd crafted me to be. Eleanor Hudson's office occupied the top floor of a sleek building in Midtown, her floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that reminded everyone who entered of exactly how successful she was. She didn't rise when I entered, merely gestured to the chair across from her glass desk while finishing a phone call that seemed deliberately timed to establish her importance. "So," she said finally, setting down her phone and examining me with cool appraisal. "Another corporate lawyer who thinks the rules of decent human behavior don't apply to him?" "He emptied our joint accounts at 3:47 this morning," I replied. "Approximately $387,000. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrow rose slightly. "And you were expecting this?" "Not today, but eventually." I opened my portfolio and slid the first set of documents across her desk. "These are our joint financial records for the past 7 years. Properties, investments, tax returns." She glanced at them, unimpressed. "Standard. Your husband made what, $1.2 million last year as partner? $1.4 million, plus bonuses." I handed her another folder. "And these are my personal financial records, the accounts he doesn't know about." This earned me her full attention. She opened the folder, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly as she scanned the contents. "You've been busy, Mrs. Crawford." "Evelyn," I corrected her. "And yes, I have. Most of my clients come in shocked and unprepared when their husbands pull this kind of stunt." "I'm not most of your clients," I said quietly. "I was a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley before I married Richard. He liked to joke that I gave up millions to make his coffee and organize his social calendar." Eleanor's lip curled slightly. "Charming." He stopped finding my intelligence charming around year 2 of our marriage. By year 5, he was introducing me at firm parties as my beautiful wife rather than mentioning I have an MBA from Wharton. "Yet you've managed to squirrel away." She flipped through the statements. "Almost $3.2 million in assets he knows nothing about." "How?" "I never stopped working. I just stopped working visibly. Remote consulting, algorithm development, investment management for select private clients. All through my LLC, which he never questioned." I smiled thinly. "Richard believes I spend my days getting manicures and planning dinner parties. The packages that come to our apartment from my clients are dismissed as more shoes. He hasn't actually looked at what I do in years." Eleanor leaned back, a new respect in her eyes. "And why now? If you were prepared, why not leave on your own timeline?" I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app, showing her the zeroed-out accounts. "Because he's accelerating things. There's someone else, probably multiple someones, but I think this is about Claire Palmer." "Martin Palmer's wife? His law partner?" I nodded. "Richard's been positioning himself for a merger with a larger firm. Martin controls the relationships that would make it happen. I've suspected for months that Richard is sleeping with Claire to solidify his position with Martin." Eleanor made a note. "We'll need documentation of the affair." "Already handled." I handed her a flash drive. GPS locations from our shared cloud account showing his frequent visits to a condo in Tribeca, registered to a shell company. Texts recovered from our shared iPad, hotel receipts, evidence of gifts purchased on our joint credit card. She stared at me for a long moment. "Most of my clients can barely find their prenuptial agreements when they come in." "I'm not here because—" "I was surprised, Ms. Hudson. I'm here because I want this executed perfectly." I met her gaze steadily. "Richard believes he's married to a trophy wife with no resources and no options. I want him to discover his mistake in the most public, most professionally damaging way possible." Eleanor smiled then, a predator recognizing a kindred spirit. "Call me Eleanor, and tell me exactly what you want to accomplish." For the next hour, we mapped out a strategy that would unfold like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Richard had made the first move, thinking it was checkmate. He had no idea we were playing an entirely different game. When I left Eleanor's office, the weight of 15 years seemed lighter somehow. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard, caught up in meetings. Might be late for the Palmers. Meet us at the restaurant? Translated from Richard's speak, he was with Claire while her husband was working, and they'd show up together with some manufactured excuse. I texted back, "No problem, looking forward to it." My next stop was a nondescript building in the garment district. The security guard barely glanced at my ID badge, not the one with Crawford on it, but the one featuring my maiden name, as I entered and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The office suite was minimally furnished, more functional than impressive. Unlike Richard's firm with its mahogany and leather aesthetic designed to intimidate clients with its opulence, my workspace was deliberately unremarkable. The algorithm flagged unusual activity at 3:50 a.m., said Mira, my assistant and the only other full-time employee of my company. Large transfers from your joint accounts. Want me to activate the contingency protocol? Yes, I replied, setting my portfolio on my glass desk. Richard's making his move. Time for us to make ours. Mira nodded, no surprise in her expression. She'd helped me design the contingency plan 3 years ago when I first discovered Richard's infidelity. I'll contact the clients with the transition message. My consulting business had grown carefully, deliberately, all through word of mouth, and under strict confidentiality agreements. My clients, mostly women-led investment firms and tech startups, knew me only by my maiden name. They valued my analytical skills and financial modeling expertise, completely unaware that my husband was the mergers and acquisitions attorney whose firm often sat across the table from them. Richard had always found it amusing that I maintained a little hobby business, as he called it. It keeps her busy while I work, he'd told his partners at a Christmas party years ago, patting my hand condescendingly. Something about websites for her friends' charities. That little hobby business had quietly grown to generate over $600,000 annually for the past 5 years. I pulled up the secure server where we kept our client files and began implementing phase 1 of what Mira and I had coded as protocol. Independence. Notifications to clients about a planned company restructuring, transferring ongoing projects to secure platforms, accelerating deliverables that were near completion. Martin Palmer called, Mira said, looking up from her computer. He wants to move your meeting to tomorrow. Martin was one of my few clients who knew my real identity. As Richard's law partner, he had initially approached me to develop a risk assessment model for their firm's Asian market expansion. Richard had never known, of course. Martin had been sworn to secrecy, appreciating the irony of using the skills of the wife his partner dismissed. Did he say why? I asked, though I could guess. His wife had an unexpected schedule change. Mira's tone was neutral, but her raised eyebrows spoke volumes. How convenient, I murmured. Confirm for tomorrow morning, and Mira, start monitoring. Richard's professional email. She didn't question this escalation, merely nodded. We'd prepared for this moment after all. By late afternoon, I had secured my business operations and begun shifting assets according to Eleanor's recommendations. I dressed for dinner with particular care, choosing an elegant black dress that Richard had always liked, paired with the diamond earrings he'd given me for our anniversary 3 years ago. The night he'd come home smelling of Claire's distinctive perfume. The restaurant was Richard's choice, naturally, an exclusive French place where the maitre d' greeted him by name, and the sommelier knew his wine preferences. I arrived exactly on time, unsurprised to find neither Richard nor the Palmers had arrived yet. Mrs. Crawford, the maitre d' said warmly. Your husband called to say he's running late. Perhaps you'd like to wait at the bar. Thank you, Antoine. That would be lovely. I sat at the bar, ordering a sparkling water while observing the room. through the mirror behind the bottles. 20 minutes later, Martin Palmer entered alone, his expression distracted as he scanned the restaurant. When he spotted me, something flickered across his face. Discomfort, perhaps, or guilt. "Evelyn," he said, approaching with a forced smile. "Lovely to see you." "Martin," I replied warmly, kissing his cheek. "Where's Claire?" She's coming separately. Had some appointment run long." He cleared his throat. "Richard's on his way too." "Of course," I said, my smile never wavering. "I believe they had the same delay." Martin's eyes sharpened, but before he could respond, I saw them in the mirror. Richard and Claire entering together, her hand on his arm, both laughing at some private joke. They stopped abruptly upon seeing us watching them, composing their faces into the appropriate masks. "Traffic was horrendous," Claire said by way of greeting, air kissing me while avoiding eye contact. Her perfume, the same scent I'd detected on Richard countless times, wafted between us. "You should have shared a cab," I replied pleasantly. "Since you were both coming from the same direction." A barely perceptible tension stiffened Richard's shoulders. "The firm, you mean?" Claire stopped by to discuss the Whitmore Foundation event. "Of course," I agreed, meeting his gaze with innocence. What else could I have meant? Dinner proceeded with the artificial pleasantness that characterized so many of our social engagements. Richard, as always, dominated the conversation, positioning himself as the authority on every topic. I played my usual role, the supportive wife, smiling at appropriate moments, asking the right questions to elevate his stories. But tonight, I watched with new clarity. The way Claire's hand occasionally disappeared beneath the table, the slight flush on Richard's neck when she leaned toward him, the growing discomfort in Martin's expression as the evening progressed. "How's your project coming along, Evelyn?" Martin asked during dessert, during a rare moment when Richard was occupied with the wine list. "The one we discussed last month?" Richard looked up sharply. "Project? What project?" Martin blinked, seemingly confused by Richard's reaction. "The charity website for the firm's foundation. Evelyn's been helping us redesign it." He covered smoothly, though not before I caught the questioning glance he sent my way. "Just a little. Hobby?" I said, echoing Richard's dismissive characterization. "Nothing important." Later, as Richard drove us home in tense silence, he finally spoke. "What was Martin talking about? What project?" Just as he said, helping with the foundation website, I lied easily. "It gives me something to do while you're working those long hours." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You should have told me." "Would you have been interested?" I asked mildly. "That's not the point. I don't like my wife having secret arrangements with my business partner." I turned to look out the window, hiding my smile at his hypocrisy. I didn't realize I needed permission. "Don't be dramatic, Evelyn." "I'm just saying we shouldn't have secrets from each other." The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. My phone buzzed with an email notification, Eleanor confirming our next steps. I dismissed it before Richard could see. "No secrets," I agreed softly. "That's so important in a marriage." When we arrived home, Richard immediately headed to his office, muttering about work he needed to finish. I went to our bedroom, removing my jewelry and hanging up my dress with methodical precision. Through the open door, I heard him curse loudly. "Evelyn!" he called, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Why can't I access our joint accounts?" I smiled at my reflection in the mirror. "Right on schedule." "Banking glitch, probably," I called back, echoing his dismissive explanation from this morning. "You should call them tomorrow." Heavy footsteps approached our bedroom. Richard appeared in the doorway, his face flushed. "Did you freeze our accounts?" I turned to face him, my expression perfectly neutral. "No, Richard. But I did call the bank about the unusual activity at 347 this morning. They were very concerned. about potential fraud. That wasn't fraud. That was me moving our money. All of our money, I corrected gently. Without discussion, to an account in your name only. The bank agreed it looked suspicious. His expression darkened. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted, my voice still calm. Those are joint accounts. My name is on them too. My salary deposits have gone into them for 15 years, he scoffed. Your salary? From your little hobby business that barely covers your shopping? I smiled then. Not the supportive wife smile he was used to, but something new. Something that made him take a small step back. We should get some sleep, I said, turning away from him. You have that big meeting tomorrow. The Lexington merger? Wouldn't want you distracted. His silence told me he was surprised I knew about the meeting. Richard had long ago stopped sharing details of his work with me, assuming I wouldn't understand or care. This isn't over, he finally said. No, I agreed, meeting his eyes in the mirror. It's just beginning. That night, Richard slept in the guest room. I lay awake in our bed, listening to the familiar sounds of our apartment, knowing it would be one of my last nights here. Not because I couldn't afford to keep it. I could buy this building outright if I wanted to. But because every corner held memories I was ready to leave behind. My phone lit up with a text from Martin Palmer. We need to talk. Not about business, about Richard and Claire. I typed back, tomorrow, my office. 9 a.m. I'll text you the address. Another message arrived, this one from Eleanor. Judge Davidson assigned to our case. Filing complete. He'll be served tomorrow. Everything was falling into place. Richard had no idea that while he'd been planning his little financial ambush, I'd been orchestrating something far more comprehensive. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to imagine his face when he discovered just how badly he'd underestimated the woman he thought he'd reduce to an ornament in his life. Tomorrow would just be the beginning. Morning arrived with the harsh clarity that follows life-altering decisions. I'd slept surprisingly well, waking before my alarm to the sound of Richard fumbling around in the guest bathroom. The cabinet doors slamming and muffled curses told me he was discovering another inconvenience. I'd quietly moved his toiletries weeks ago, replacing his premium grooming products with drugstore alternatives. Small, petty perhaps. But there was something satisfying about him having to use generic shaving cream. I dressed with purpose. A charcoal gray suit I'd never worn before, purchased from my personal account, and kept in the back of my closet with the tags still attached. Richard had never seen it. Not that he paid much attention to my wardrobe unless it was something he'd selected for me to wear to his firm's events. The kitchen was empty when I entered, though Richard's coffee cup sat unwashed in the sink, a small act of defiance. He'd already left, no doubt rushing to his office to begin damage control. By now, he would have discovered that not only were our joint accounts frozen, but his personal credit cards were showing unusual holds as well, a convenient fraud alert, triggered by the exact kind of suspicious activity that banks watch for, large transfers in the middle of the night. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. Office ready. M. Palmer confirmed for 9 a.m. I texted back, Eleanor joining remotely at 9:30. Thut. Timing had to be precise. Martin would arrive expecting a private conversation about his wife's affair with my husband. He would not be expecting the divorce attorney to join us, nor the documentation we had prepared. I arrived at my office at 8:30, giving me time to review the final preparations with Mira. Richard's been busy, she said, handing me a tablet displaying his email activity. 17 messages to the bank since 5 a.m., 9 to his personal attorney, 3 to Claire Palmer. I scanned the emails, noting the progression from irritation to panic to thinly veiled threats. The bank's responses were perfectly non-committal. The accounts were temporarily frozen pending an investigation into potential fraud, as requested by one of the account holders. He also attempted to access your LLC records, Mira continued. 3 failed login attempts to the state business registry using your personal information. Predictable, I murmured. He's looking for assets. Should I activate the next phase? Nodded. Begin the transfer sequence and prepare the documentation for Martin. At precisely 9 a.m., the security desk called to announce Martin Palmer's arrival. Unlike Richard, who would have kept someone waiting to establish dominance, I instructed them to send him up immediately. Martin looked distinctly uncomfortable as he entered my office, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the space. This was clearly not the charity hobby shop he'd been led to believe I operated. "Evelyn," he said, accepting my handshake with visible confusion. "This is unexpected. Please, sit down." I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Can I offer you coffee?" "No, thank you." He remained standing, glancing around at the monitors displaying complex financial data and the glass-walled conference room where Mira was preparing documents. "I thought we were meeting about Richard and Claire." "We are," I confirmed, taking my seat. "But first, I think we should clarify our professional relationship, don't you?" Martin shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I apologize for almost revealing our arrangement last night. Richard clearly had no idea you were consulting for the firm, and I didn't mean to—" "Martin," I interrupted gently. "I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about the fact that your wife is sleeping with my husband, and that it may have implications for both our financial futures." The color drained from his face. He lowered himself slowly into the chair. "You know?" "I've known for months," I confirmed. "Just as I suspect you've known as well." He stared at his hands. I didn't want to believe it. "And yet you approached me independently for consulting work, keeping it from Richard. Was that a coincidence?" Martin's eyes met mine, a flash of something, embarrassment perhaps, or grudging respect, crossing his features. "I needed the best financial analysis for our Asian expansion. Everyone in the industry said that was you, but Richard had always dismissed the idea of involving you in firm business. So you hired me behind his back," I finished for him. "Because despite whatever Richard told you about my capabilities, you knew better." "Your models saved us millions on that deal," Martin acknowledged. "Richard took the credit for the strategy, of course." "Of course," I echoed, thinking of how many times Richard had boasted about that particular success at dinner parties while I smiled politely beside him. "But that's not why we're here," Martin continued, his expression hardening. "Last night, it became clear to me that whatever is happening between Richard and Claire goes beyond a momentary indiscretion." I allowed myself a small smile. "Is that what Richard calls it when he sleeps with his partner's wife? A momentary indiscretion?" Martin flushed. "You're remarkably calm about this." "I've had time to adjust to the reality," I replied. "And to prepare for what comes next." His eyes narrowed. "What exactly does that mean?" Before I could answer, Mira entered with a folder. "The documents you requested, Ms. Winters." Martin frowned at the use of my maiden name. "Winters?" I accepted. The folder with a nod of thanks to Mira. "My professional name. The name under which I've been operating my financial consulting business for the past 5 years. The charity websites? A convenient fiction that Richard created and I never bothered to correct," I explained. "My actual business provides algorithmic trading models and risk assessment strategies to select clients, including your firm." I handed him the folder. Inside were printed copies of emails between Richard and Claire, including plans they'd made to meet at various hotels. Interspersed were financial records showing suspicious transfers from both the firm's accounts and Martin's personal accounts, all authorized by Richard. "What is this?" Martin asked, his voice barely audible as he flipped through the pages. "Evidence that Richard and Claire's relationship may have compromised more than just our marriages," I said calmly. "Richard has been systematically moving firm assets through shell companies, coinciding with his meetings with Claire, Martin looked up sharply. That's impossible. I sign off on all major transfers. Digital signatures can be copied, I observed. Especially when your wife has access to your personal devices and passwords. The blood drained from his face again as the implications sank in. Are you suggesting Claire has been helping Richard embezzle from our firm? I'm not suggesting anything, I replied. I'm showing you documentation that raises serious questions. Questions you might want answered before the Lexington merger proceeds. Martin's hand trembled slightly as he closed the folder. Why are you showing me this? Because in approximately 30 minutes, Richard will be served with divorce papers, I said. And shortly thereafter, the firm will receive notice of a potential financial audit related to those irregular transfers. You're going to destroy the firm, Martin whispered. Everything we've built. No, I corrected him. Richard's actions may damage the firm. I'm simply making sure those actions come to light. And what do you want from me? His voice had taken on a resigned quality. Nothing, I said simply. Except perhaps your presence when Richard realizes the extent of his miscalculation. Martin's brow furrowed. I don't understand. The door opened again, and Mira announced, Ms. Hudson is ready on the secure line. I gestured to the conference room. My divorce attorney would like to discuss some additional documentation we've uncovered. Documentation that suggests Richard has been using firm resources to hide personal assets. Assets he's been siphoning from our marriage in preparation for his own divorce filing. Martin's head snapped up. Richard was planning to divorce you. For at least 6 months, I confirmed. Based on the timeline of hidden transfers and the lease on a certain Tribeca apartment registered to a shell company. Understanding dawned in Martin's eyes. The Chen Holdings property. Richard said that was for a client. The only client being serviced at that property was your wife, I replied coolly. Martin flinched. Then, with the decisive movement of a man accustomed to making million-dollar decisions, he stood and straightened his tie. I'd like to speak with your attorney. As we moved to the conference room, my phone vibrated with a text from Eleanor. Service complete. Subject visibly agitated. Currently making multiple calls. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction, imagining Richard's face as he was handed divorce papers in front of his colleagues. The timing had been deliberate. The Lexington merger meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., with all senior partners present. The process server had been instructed to deliver the papers precisely at 9:45, 15 minutes before the meeting began. Just enough time for Richard to read the initial allegations, but not enough time for him to digest the full implications. In the conference room, Eleanor's face appeared on the large screen, her expression coolly professional. Mr. Palmer, thank you for joining us. I understand this is an unorthodox situation, but given the potential legal implications for both your firm and your personal finances, Mrs. Crawford felt it was important to bring these matters to your attention before they become public. Martin took a seat, his posture rigid. What exactly are you suggesting might become public, Ms. Hudson? Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. That depends entirely on how the next few hours unfold. My client has documented extensive financial impropriety involving your partner, Richard Crawford, and, potentially, your wife, Claire Palmer. These improprieties include, but are not limited to, unauthorized transfers from firm accounts, misappropriation of client funds, and falsification of financial records. These are serious allegations, Martin said, his lawyer's instincts visibly kicking in. They are, Eleanor agreed, and they are thoroughly documented. The question now is whether these documents find their way to the SEC and your firm's clients, or whether we can reach a more discreet resolution. Martin's eyes narrowed. This sounds dangerously close to blackmail, Ms. Hudson. Not at all, Eleanor replied smoothly. My client has a legal obligation to report financial fraud when she becomes aware of it. She's merely offering your firm the professional courtesy of addressing these issues internally first. I watched the calculation happening behind Martin's eyes, the swift assessment of risks, options, and potential outcomes. It was the same analytical process I'd observed in countless negotiation sessions, except this time, he was on the defensive. What would this discreet resolution entail? He finally asked. I stepped in. Richard's immediate removal from the Lexington merger team, a full internal audit of all accounts he's touched in the past year, and a fair divorce settlement that acknowledges my contributions to our marital assets. And Claire? Martin asked, his voice tight. That's between you and your wife, I said. My concern is protecting what's mine. Martin was quiet for a long moment, staring at the folder in front of him. Then, with deliberate movements, he removed his phone from his pocket and placed it on the conference table. I need to make a call to the firm, he said. To postpone the Lexington meeting, Eleanor nodded. Of course, we'll give you privacy. As Mira and I moved to leave the room, Martin said, Evelyn, wait. I paused at the doorway. Did you ever actually care about him? Martin asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. I considered the question carefully. I loved the man I thought I married, I finally answered. But that man never existed. He was as much a fiction as my supposed hobby business. Martin nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I always thought he was a fool for not recognizing what he had in you. Your awareness of my capabilities didn't stop you from allowing him to dismiss me for 15 years, I pointed out, not unkindly. But I appreciate the sentiment. Back in my office, Eleanor remained on a private line. Well played, she commented. Palmer will be much more concerned about the firm's reputation than Richard's marriage. Martin's a pragmatist, I agreed. He'll sacrifice Richard to save the firm. Richard's called me 6 times in the past 15 minutes, Eleanor said, allowing herself a small smile. His messages are becoming increasingly desperate. Let him stew, I advised. The longer he's uncertain about what we know, the more likely he is to make additional mistakes. My phone lit up with a text from the doorman at our apartment building. Mr. Crawford returned home, appeared agitated, requested access to your private storage unit, but was denied per your instructions, another piece falling into place. Richard was looking for assets, physical items he could leverage or sell. The storage unit contained nothing of real value, merely carefully selected decoys, empty designer handbag boxes, receipt books with highlighted expensive purchases, and a prominently displayed folder labeled investment records that contained nothing but old grocery lists. He's getting desperate, I told Eleanor. Checking the storage unit means he's looking for quick assets to liquidate. The temporary restraining order on your joint assets should be in effect within the hour, Eleanor confirmed. After that, any attempt to access or transfer marital property will put him in contempt. Mira knocked and entered, her expression serious. Richard just called the office landline. When I wouldn't put him through to you, he said he's coming here. I exchanged a glance with Eleanor on the screen. Perfect, we said in unison. Mira, please ask Martin to remain in the conference room for now, I instructed. And when Richard arrives, have security escort him directly to my office. As Mira left to make the arrangements, Eleanor asked, Are you sure you want to confront him without me physically present? Absolutely, I replied. Richard performs differently when there's no audience. I want to see his unfiltered reaction. While we waited, I pulled up the real-time tracking dashboard for all of our accounts. As expected, there had been multiple attempt access notifications. Richard trying various passwords and security question combinations to break into accounts he didn't know existed. He's not being subtle, Eleanor observed, watching the same data on her end. Richard has never needed to be subtle, I replied. His entire career has been built on the assumption that power doesn't require subtlety. My phone rang, the security desk announcing Richard's arrival. I straightened my jacket and took a centering breath. Showtime, Eleanor murmured, before minimizing her window on my monitor. She would remain connected, documenting everything for the record, but out of Richard's direct line of sight. When Richard burst through my office door, the first thing I noticed was his dishevelment. Tie askew, hair uncombed, the polished corporate attorney facade cracking under pressure. The second thing I noticed was his expression. Not the cold anger I expected, but something closer to bewilderment. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the divorce papers. "And what is this place?" I remained seated, gesturing to the chair, across from my desk. "This is my office, Richard. My real office." He didn't sit, instead pacing like a caged animal. "Your office? Since when do you have an office? And what's this nonsense about financial misconduct and hidden assets? I transferred our money to protect it." "From whom?" I asked calmly. "From—" He stopped short, caught in the contradiction. "That's not the point. The point is you've frozen all our accounts and filed for divorce without even talking to me. Just as you emptied our joint accounts without talking to me," I pointed out. "Except in my case, I had legal grounds to do so." Richard ran a hand through his hair, further disheveling it. "This is insane. Whatever you think you know—" "I know about Claire," I interrupted quietly. "I know about the Tribeca apartment. I know about the money you've been siphoning from our accounts and from the firm. I know everything, Richard." He stared at me, calculation replacing confusion in his eyes. "You're bluffing. You don't know anything." I smiled then, reaching for my keyboard. With a few keystrokes, I brought up a split screen. On one side, the GPS history from his phone showing frequent visits to the Tribeca address. On the other, bank transfers from our joint account to the shell company that owned the property. "Would you like to see the security footage next?" I asked pleasantly. "The building has excellent cameras, very high resolution." Richard sank into the chair, his bravado faltering. "How did you get access to my phone data?" "Our family cloud account," I reminded him. "The one you set up and then forgot about. The one that backs up all your devices automatically." A flash of anger crossed his face. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been protecting myself," I corrected. "Just as you've been protecting yourself by moving assets and preparing for your own divorce filing." That got his attention. "What are you talking about?" "The Tribeca apartment lease," I clarified. "Signed 6 months ago, with a 2-year term. The new bank account in your name only, established around the same time. The consultations with Jeffrey Winters at BGS Law." "Yes, I know. About those two." Richard's face had gone pale. "You don't understand—" "I understand perfectly," I cut him off. "You've been planning your exit for months. The only miscalculation was timing. You didn't expect me to act first." For a moment, Richard seemed genuinely lost for words. Then, like the skilled attorney he was, he shifted tactics. "Evelyn," he said, his voice softening as he leaned forward. "Whatever you think is happening, we can work through this. 15 years of marriage shouldn't end over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "Is that what you call sleeping with Claire Palmer? Or embezzling from your firm? Or systematically draining our joint assets?" Richard's eyes darted to the side, a tell I'd observed countless times when he was creating a strategic lie. "Claire is a mistake, I admit that. But the financial movements were to protect us, not harm us. The firm has been unstable since the Lexington talks began. And yet Martin doesn't seem to share your concerns about the firm's stability," I noted. "In fact, he was quite surprised to learn about the unauthorized transfers you've been making." Richard went very still. "Martin is here?" On cue, the conference room door opened and Martin stepped out, visible through the glass wall of my office. He stood there silently, meeting Richard's gaze with an expression of cold disappointment. "What have you done?" Richard whispered, turning back to me with genuine shock. "I've simply shared information that affects multiple parties," I replied, Information you should have disclosed to your business partner long ago. Richard's shock quickly morphed into fury. You had no right. Those are firm matters, not marriage matters. They became marriage matters when you used our joint accounts to fund your affair, I pointed out. And when you tried to hide marital assets using firm resources. He slammed his hand on my desk. You vindictive bitch! You'll destroy everything! I didn't flinch. No, Richard. You destroyed everything the moment you decided I was an accessory, rather than a partner. Martin chose that moment to enter my office, his expression grim. Richard, the executive committee is convening an emergency meeting at noon. Your presence is required. Richard turned to him, desperation evident. Martin, whatever she's told you, save it, Martin cut him off. I've seen the documentation, all of it. What documentation? Richard demanded, turning back to me. What exactly do you think you have? I met his gaze steadily. Everything. Richard, every transfer, every meeting, every email, every reservation. I've been gathering evidence for 3 years. 3 years? He repeated incredulously. You've been planning this for 3 years? No, I corrected him. I've been protecting myself for 3 years. You forced my hand with your little 3 a.m. withdrawal. Richard looked between Martin and me, the full implications of his situation finally dawning on him. This is a setup. You're trying to push me out before the Lexington deal closes. Martin shook his head. The Lexington meeting has been postponed pending an internal review. A review that will focus primarily on your client accounts. The color drained from Richard's face. You can't do that. Those are my clients. They're firm clients, Martin corrected. And if what Evelyn has shown me is accurate, they've been systematically overcharged and their funds misappropriated. Richard's fury returned in full force. He rounded on me. You think you're so clever, don't you? Playing the quiet wife all these years while secretly plotting against me. I wasn't plotting against you, I said quietly. I was simply seeing you clearly. While you underestimated me, a mistake you've been making since the day we met. You're nothing without me, Richard snarled. A failed analyst who gave up her career to play housewife. I smiled then, pressing another key on my keyboard. The monitor displayed my company's client list and financial statements, annual revenues, growth projections, asset management totals. Does this look like failure to you? I asked mildly. Richard stared at the screen, his expression moving from confusion to disbelief. This isn't real. This is some kind of fake. It's very real, Martin interrupted. In fact, Evelyn's firm has been consulting for us for the past 2 years. Her risk assessment models saved the Asian expansion from a potential disaster. Richard turned to Martin, betrayal evident in his expression. You hired my wife behind my back? Because you consistently dismissed her expertise, Martin replied, despite evidence to the contrary. My phone buzzed with a notification. The temporary restraining order had been granted. All our marital assets were now legally frozen, with significant penalties for any attempts to access or transfer them. I think we're done here, I said, standing. Richard, Eleanor Hudson will handle all further communications regarding our divorce. Martin, thank you for your time this morning. Richard remained seated, seemingly unable to process the rapid dismantling of both his marriage and his career. You can't just dismiss me, he finally said, his voice hollow. This is my life too. Yes, I agreed. And you should have valued it more carefully. As security arrived to escort Richard from the building, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a calm certainty that justice was finally being served. Martin lingered after Richard had been removed, his expression thoughtful. You've been planning this moment for a long time. Not planning, I corrected. Preparing. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. What happens now? Now, I said, gathering my things. I build a life that doesn't require hiding who I am or what I'm capable of. As I left the office, my phone buzzed with a final message from Eleanor. Second phase ready when you are. I smiled. Richard thought today was the worst day of his life. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring. The firm's emergency executive committee meeting was scheduled for noon. I had no intention of attending. My presence wasn't required for what would unfold there. Instead, I directed my driver to take me to the Pierre Hotel, where Eleanor had arranged a suite for me to use during the transition period. Ms. Winters, the hotel manager greeted me, using my professional name as instructed. Everything has been prepared according to Ms. Hudson's specifications. I thanked him as he personally escorted me to the suite, a corner unit with sweeping views of Central Park. The space was elegant, but not ostentatious, perfect for someone who wanted privacy without calling attention to themselves. Your packages have been delivered, he informed me, gesturing to several designer shopping bags arranged neatly on the writing desk. And the safe has been programmed with your requested code. Another small detail in our meticulous plan. The shopping bags contained not clothes or accessories, but crucial documents I'd been gradually removing from our apartment over the past month. Financial records, portable hard drives, irreplaceable photographs. Anything I couldn't risk Richard destroying in a fit of rage. Once alone, I kicked off my heels and checked my secure messaging app. Mira had sent a series of updates. R left building, attempting to return to firm. M called ahead to security. Executive committee members all present. SEC representative arrived separately. C. Palmer attempting to contact you through office line. Calls blocked per protocol. Claire Palmer. I wondered if she knew yet that her affair with Richard had been exposed to her husband, or that her complicity in Richard's financial schemes was now documented and in the hands of both the firm's executive committee and the SEC. I poured myself a sparkling water and settled on the sofa with my tablet, pulling up the security feeds from my office building. Another precaution Eleanor had insisted upon, maintaining visual confirmation of all comings and goings in the aftermath of our morning's revelations. The feed showed Richard pacing outside the building, repeatedly attempting to call someone, likely his personal attorney, judging by his expression of growing frustration. His lawyer would be explaining the ramifications of the temporary restraining order, the evidence we'd presented regarding the embezzlement, and the potential criminal charges on the horizon. My phone rang. Eleanor. The SEC has officially opened. An investigation, she informed me without preamble. Their representative is presenting the initial findings to the executive committee as we speak. Faster than expected, I noted. They've been building a case for months, Eleanor revealed. Your documentation was the final piece they needed to move forward. That was information I hadn't been privy to. The SEC was already investigating Richard? Not Richard specifically, Eleanor clarified. The firm had raised some red flags with certain international transactions. Until now, they couldn't determine which partner was responsible. I considered this new information. Does Richard know the SEC was already involved? He's finding out right now, Eleanor replied, and I could hear the satisfied smile in her voice. My tablet pinged with an alert. The real-time monitoring system I'd set up for our apartment building showed Richard had just arrived home. The doorman would have instructions to allow him in, but to document his movements. Another piece of evidence for potential property destruction or removal of marital assets. He's at the apartment, I told Eleanor. Probably looking for anything of value he can grab before the restraining order is formally served. I've already dispatched an officer to deliver the official order, Eleanor assured me. They should arrive within 20 minutes. I pulled up the building's security feed on my tablet. Sure enough, Richard was storming through the lobby, ignoring the doorman's greeting. His normally impeccable appearance was now completely disheveled. Tie missing, shirt half untucked, hair standing on end where he'd repeatedly run his hands through it. "He looks unhinged," I observed. "Perfect," Eleanor replied coldly. "Anything he does now will only strengthen our case." I ended the call and continued watching as Richard disappeared into the elevator. The next available camera picked him up as he exited on our floor, fumbling with his keys before bursting into our apartment. The interior cameras I'd discreetly installed months ago activated with his entrance, capturing his movements from multiple angles as he went straight to my closet. As expected, he began pulling designer handbags from the shelves, checking for authenticity cards and receipts, items he could quickly convert to cash. What he didn't know was that I'd already replaced the most valuable pieces with convincing replicas, each containing a GPS tracker. The originals were safely stored in a secure location, documented in my asset inventory. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. "Executive meeting concluded. R officially suspended pending investigation. Building access revoked." I texted back, "Status of electronic access? IT implementing lockout protocol now. Email, servers, client files all being restricted." I returned my attention to the tablet. Richard had moved from my closet to my jewelry box, cursing loudly when he discovered the empty velvet slots where my most valuable pieces had been. Another disappointment for him. All significant jewelry had been removed weeks ago, photographed, appraised, and secured. The apartment buzzer sounded on the video feed. Richard ignored it initially, continuing his frantic search. When it buzzed again, more insistently, he stalked to the intercom. "What?" he snapped. "Mr. Crawford, there's an officer here with legal documents that require your immediate attention." The doorman's voice replied calmly. Richard's face contorted with rage. "Tell them to leave them with you. I'm busy." "I'm afraid the officer insists on delivering them personally, sir. It's a court order." The temporary restraining order had arrived right on schedule. Richard slammed his fist against the wall, then stabbed the intercom button again. "Send them up," he growled. I watched as the process server, a composed woman in a formal suit, entered our apartment, unfazed by Richard's hostile demeanor. "Richard Crawford?" she verified, though she clearly knew who he was. "Obviously," he snapped. "This is a temporary restraining order issued by Judge Davidson of the New York County Supreme Court," she stated professionally, handing him the document. "It prohibits you from removing, transferring, encumbering, concealing, or disposing of any property subject to equitable distribution in your pending divorce case. This includes but is not limited to financial assets, physical property, vehicles, artwork, jewelry, and collectibles." Richard snatched the paper from her hand. "I know what a restraining order is." "The order is effective immediately," she continued, unperturbed. "Any violation constitutes contempt of court and may result in fines or imprisonment. Do you understand these terms?" "Get out," Richard hissed. "I need verbal confirmation that you understand the terms of the order, Mr. Crawford." "Yes, I understand." "Now get out of my apartment," the process server nodded, making a note on her tablet. "Your understanding has been recorded. Good day, Mr. Crawford." As she left, Richard threw the document across the room with a howl of frustration. Then, seemingly remembering the half-empty shopping bag of my belongings he'd collected, he cursed. Again. Now anything he removed would be a direct violation of the order he'd just acknowledged understanding. My phone rang again. "Martin Palmer. The executive committee has suspended Richard pending a full investigation," he informed me without greeting. "The SEC has seized his files and restricted his access to all firm systems." "How did he take it?" I asked, though I could guess from his current behavior on my tablet screen. "He wasn't present for the decision," Martin replied. "He tried to return to the office, but security stopped him based on my instructions. He's been calling everyone on the committee, making threats, demanding explanations." I watched as Richard, seemingly having the same conversation on his end, paced our living room like a caged animal. "And the firm's position?" Self-preservation, Martin said frankly. We're cooperating fully with the SEC to demonstrate that Richard's actions were isolated and not indicative of firm-wide practices. Throwing him under the bus, I translated. Precisely, Martin agreed without hesitation. The evidence you provided leaves us no choice. The alternative would be allowing his misconduct to potentially bring down the entire firm. Richard had now collapsed onto our sofa, head in his hands, the picture of desperation. My tablet pinged with another alert. He was attempting to access my personal laptop that I'd deliberately left in the apartment. The keystroke logger captured his increasingly frustrated password attempts. There's something else, Martin continued, his voice dropping slightly. Claire is demanding to know what's happening. She claims she has no knowledge of any financial impropriety. And do you believe her? I asked, genuinely curious about his state of mind. Martin was silent for a moment. I don't know what to believe anymore, he finally admitted. But I do know that I need to protect myself and the firm. A wise priority, I acknowledged. And what about your marriage? Another pause. That's complicated. Claire is claiming Richard manipulated her, that she was a victim of his charm and position. I thought about the emails I'd seen between them, the calculated planning of their encounters, the careful coordination of their stories. Do you have access to Claire's emails and texts? Not yet, Martin replied. But I've requested our IT department secure her devices as part of the firm-wide investigation. You might want to review those personally before making any decisions about your marriage, I suggested. Particularly any communication between Claire and Richard regarding the Tribeca apartment or the unauthorized transfers. On my tablet, Richard had abandoned his attempt to hack my laptop and was now making another call, his expression darkening as he listened to whoever had answered. Claire's not answering his calls, Martin observed, and I realized he must be monitoring Richard's phone activity through the firm's systems. Interesting, I murmured. Self-preservation seems to be the theme of the day. Evelyn, Martin said, his tone shifting to something more personal. I owe you an apology. For years, I accepted Richard's characterization of you without question. It was professionally negligent of me. Apology accepted, I replied simply. Though if you truly want to make amends, there is something you could do. Name it. The Douglas Foundation account, I said. Richard has been claiming credit for the investment strategy that doubled their endowment last year. That was your work, Martin guessed immediately. It was. And I'd appreciate the foundation being informed of that fact. Consider it done, Martin promised. Actually, there are several clients who should know about your contribution to their success. I'll leave that to your discretion, I said. My concern is ensuring that Richard can't continue to benefit from my work. As we ended the call, I returned my attention to the tablet. Richard was now frantically searching our home office, pulling out drawers and emptying file cabinets. He was looking for something specific, probably evidence of my business, or documentation of the assets I'd been hiding from him. He wouldn't find anything. The office, like everything else in our shared life, had been meticulously sanitized over the past months. Any trace of my real work, my real finances, my real self, had been systematically removed and secured elsewhere. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Judge Davidson granted our motion for emergency disclosure of all financial records. Ours. Banks are being served now. Another piece falling into place. Richard's personal accounts, the ones he thought I knew nothing about, would now be subject to immediate disclosure and freeze. I texted back, proceed with Phase 3? Eleanor's response came quickly. Timing optimal. Green light. Phase 3 was perhaps the most satisfying part of our strategy, the systematic dismantling of Richard's carefully constructed personal myth. For years, he had positioned himself as a brilliant legal mind, a financial guru, an irreplaceable asset to the firm. Now, Clients would learn the truth about who had really been managing their matters, creating their strategies, delivering their results. I sent a pre-drafted email to Mira. Activate client notice protocol. Within minutes, carefully worded emails would be sent to select clients, those whose matters I had substantially handled, but for whom Richard had taken credit. The messages wouldn't directly accuse Richard of misrepresentation, but would simply clarify who had been working behind the scenes on their behalf. The tablet alert pinged again. Richard was now attempting to access our home safe. Unlike the decoy safe in his office, this one contained nothing of real value. Just enough cash to be plausible and a few pieces of costume jewelry I'd deliberately left as bait. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Winters? I answered cautiously. It's Claire Palmer. Her voice was tight, controlled, but with an undercurrent of panic. We need to talk. I considered hanging up, but curiosity won out. I'm listening. Whatever you think is happening. Between Richard and me, you don't understand the full picture, she began. I understand perfectly, I replied coolly. I have copies of all your emails, texts, and meeting calendar invitations for the past year. I have security footage from the Tribeca apartment building. I have financial records of every gift Richard purchased for you using our joint accounts. Claire's sharp intake of breath was audible. That's invasion of privacy. No, Claire. That's protecting myself from my husband's betrayal and your complicity. I was never comfortable with what Richard was doing, she protested. The financial aspects especially. He assured me it was all above board. I laughed softly. And yet you helped him move firm money through your private accounts. You provided access to Martin's passwords and signature stamps. You created alibis for meetings that never happened. Silence stretched between us. What do you want? She finally asked, her voice small. I don't want anything from you, Claire, I said truthfully. Your marriage is your business. Your professional future is between you and the firm's executive committee. My only concern is ensuring Richard can't continue to benefit from either my personal or professional contributions. He says you've destroyed him, Claire whispered, that you've been plotting this for years. Richard has destroyed himself, I corrected her. I simply refuse to be collateral damage. Martin knows everything, doesn't he? The resignation in her voice confirmed she already knew the answer. Martin has seen the evidence, I confirmed. What he chooses to do with that information is his decision. After a moment of silence, Claire asked, Did you ever suspect, before, you had proof? I thought about the gradual shift in Richard's behavior over the years, the growing dismissiveness, the late nights, the way his eyes stopped meeting mine when he discussed firm matters. I knew who Richard really was long before I had evidence of what he was doing, I replied honestly. The evidence just confirmed what my instincts had already told me. I should have trusted my instincts too, Claire said quietly, and hung up. Set down my phone, considering the implications of that final comment. Had Claire begun to recognize that she was just another pawn in Richard's game? Or was she simply trying to position herself as another victim? My tablet pinged with yet another alert. Richard had moved to our bedroom and was now searching through my desk. The small feminine writing desk he'd given me as an anniversary gift years ago, meant to accommodate the shopping lists and social correspondence he assumed occupied my time. He yanked open the shallow drawer, finding it empty except for a single envelope addressed to him in my handwriting. I smiled, knowing exactly what it contained. A letter I'd written 3 years ago after discovering his first betrayal, updated periodically as his deceptions multiplied. Richard tore it open, his expression shifting from anger to confusion as he began to read. Richard, if you're reading this, then you've discovered that I've been keeping secrets too. The difference is that my secrets were necessary for self-preservation, while yours were born of greed and ego. For years, you've treated me as an ornament in your life, beautiful but ultimately without substance or value beyond what I could contribute to your image. You dismissed my intelligence, minimized my contributions, and assumed I was oblivious to your betrayals. That was your first mistake. I've known about Claire for over a year. I've known about the others before her. I've known about the money you've been siphoning from our accounts and from the firm. I've known everything, Richard. That you never suspected I was capable of such awareness was your second mistake. By now, you're discovering the extent of my preparations. Every account frozen, every asset documented, every betrayal recorded. This isn't revenge, Richard. It's justice. Your third and final mistake was assuming that because I chose not to contribute to your firm in an official capacity, I had stopped being the financial strategist who once outperformed everyone at Morgan. Stanley, the woman whose analytical skills you once admired before they threatened your ego. I never stopped working. I never stopped succeeding. I simply stopped sharing that success with someone who couldn't appreciate it. Or me. Goodbye, Richard. Wish I could say it was good while it lasted, but we both know that would be one more lie in a marriage built on them. Evelyn, I watched as Richard's face contorted with rage. He crumpled the letter in his fist, then threw it across the room before collapsing onto our bed, his body shaking with what might have been sobs or laughter. It was hard to tell from the security feed. My phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. Attempts to access my hidden accounts had ceased. Richard had either given up or been locked out by the bank's security protocols. Another text from Eleanor. SEC has expanded investigation to include potential mail and wire fraud. Criminal charges likely. The situation was escalating faster than even we had anticipated. What had begun as a divorce case was rapidly evolving into a criminal investigation that could send Richard to prison. While that hadn't been my primary objective, I couldn't pretend to feel any sympathy for him. He had made his choices, repeatedly and deliberately. A knock at my hotel suite door interrupted my thoughts. I checked the security peephole to find a courier holding a large envelope. "Delivery for Ms. Winters," he announced when I opened the door. "Signature required." I signed for the package and brought it inside, recognizing the seal of Judge Davidson's court. Inside was the official court order granting our motion for expedited financial discovery, along with a personal note from Eleanor. First hearing scheduled for tomorrow, 9 a.m. Wear the Navy Chanel suit. Are expected to contest everything despite overwhelming evidence. Of course he would. Richard's entire professional identity was built on never admitting defeat, even when facing impossible odds. It was what made him an effective litigator and a terrible husband. I returned to the window, gazing out at Central Park as evening descended on the city. Somewhere across town, Richard was frantically trying to salvage what remained of his life and career. His law partners were distancing themselves to protect the firm. His mistress was constructing her narrative of victimhood. His financial resources were rapidly dwindling as banks froze accounts and credit lines. And tomorrow, in a courtroom he had walked into hundreds of times as the confident, commanding attorney everyone deferred to, he would face me as an adversary, rather than an accessory. My phone buzzed with one final message for the day, this one from Mira. Client responses beginning to come in. Multiple requests to continue working with you directly. 4 have already terminated representation with the firm. The professional exodus had begun. As word spread of Richard's suspension and the SEC investigation, clients would naturally seek to protect their own interests. Those who learned of my role in their matters would reconsider their allegiances. I texted back, "Schedule calls beginning day after tomorrow, priority to Douglas Foundation." Tomorrow belonged to the courtroom, but the day after would mark the beginning of my professional emergence from Richard's shadow. My tablet pinged with a final alert from the apartment security system. Richard was leaving, taking nothing with him. The restraining order had accomplished its purpose. His shoulders were slumped in defeat as he waited for the elevator, the polished corporate predator reduced to a cornered animal. As the doors closed on his defeated figure, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a quiet certainty that justice was finally being served. Richard had spent 15 years underestimating me, dismissing me, reducing me to an ornamental backdrop in his life. Tomorrow he would discover exactly who he had really been married to all this time, and it would destroy the last remaining illusion he had about himself. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when I arrived the next morning. News of the SEC investigation into one of the city's most prominent law firms had leaked overnight, and Richard's name was being mentioned in every hushed conversation. Eleanor met me at the private entrance, her expression betraying nothing, as she guided me through security. "They don't know you're involved yet," she murmured, "but they will after today's hearing." I nodded, straightening the lapels of my navy Chanel suit, the one Eleanor had specifically recommended. It projected confidence and professionalism without ostentation. Perfect for someone who wanted to be taken seriously rather than dismissed, as a decorative spouse. "Is Richard here?" I asked as we walked toward the courtroom. "Arrived 20 minutes ago with Jeffrey Winters," Eleanor confirmed. "He looks like he hasn't slept." "He probably hasn't," I replied, thinking of the security feeds showing him leaving our apartment at 3 a.m., returning to the Tribeca property. That was now part of the evidence against him. The courtroom was nearly empty. Eleanor had requested a closed hearing given the sensitive financial matters and ongoing SEC investigation. Judge Davidson was already seated, reviewing documents with a slight frown creasing her forehead. And there was Richard, at the respondent's table, hunched in conversation with his attorney. He looked up as we entered, his expression flickering, between rage and disbelief as he took in my appearance. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the deferential wife he was accustomed to seeing. My hair was styled in a sleek, professional bob rather than the softer look he preferred. My makeup was minimal and precise. My posture conveyed confidence rather than submission. I met his gaze directly, without the accommodating smile I'd worn for 15 years, and saw something new in his eyes: uncertainty. "All rise," the clerk announced as Judge Davidson called the court to order. The preliminary hearing proceeded with the clinical efficiency that Eleanor had prepared me for. Financial declarations were entered into evidence. The temporary restraining order was extended pending full financial disclosure. Richard's attorney attempted to argue that the asset freeze was unnecessarily punitive, but was swiftly shut down when Eleanor presented evidence of the 3 a.m. account emptying. "Your Honor," Jeffrey Winters argued, "my client was simply protecting marital assets that he believed were at risk due to Mrs. Crawford's erratic behavior." Eleanor didn't even rise from her seat. "My client's behavior has been meticulously documented and entirely appropriate. Mr. Crawford's unexplained transfer of nearly $400,000 at 3:47 in the morning, however, speaks for itself." Judge Davidson peered over her glasses at Richard. "Mr. Crawford, as an attorney yourself, you must understand how this looks." Richard straightened, attempting to summon his courtroom persona. "Your Honor, there are extenuating circumstances that haven't been disclosed." "Such as?" the judge prompted. Richard glanced at his attorney, who subtly shook his head. A warning. "Not to speak freely. My wife has been concealing significant assets for years," Richard finally stated, "operating a business under her maiden name that I had no knowledge of." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Richard's attempt to paint me as the deceptive spouse, the one hiding assets. Eleanor had prepared me for this exact scenario. "Your Honor," Eleanor interjected smoothly, "we anticipated this allegation. Mrs. Crawford has maintained a successful financial consulting business throughout the marriage, operating under her maiden name of Winters. All income has been properly reported on joint tax returns signed by Mr. Crawford himself for the past 5 years. She produced the tax returns, highlighting the Schedule C forms that detailed my business income. Richard had signed each one without ever reading the details, assuming they were prepared by our accountant without his input needed. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, Mrs. Crawford maintained separate business accounts, as is standard practice for any entrepreneur. These accounts were never concealed. Mr. Crawford simply never inquired about them. All personal income derived from this business was properly documented and has been included in Mrs. Crawford's financial declaration. Richard's face flushed with anger. She never told me she was running a multi-million-dollar consulting firm. She let me believe she was doing charity work, designing websites for friends. Judge Davidson raised an eyebrow. Mr. Crawford, are you testifying that you never read the tax returns you signed? Or that you never inquired about your wife's professional activities over the course of a 15-year marriage? Richard's attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. Your Honor, the point is that the scope and scale of Mrs. Crawford's business activities were deliberately withheld from my client. That's not what the evidence suggests, Judge Davidson replied, reviewing the documents. What I'm seeing is a spouse who maintained a successful professional practice while the other spouse showed remarkably little interest in those achievements. She looked up, her gaze direct. Unless you're suggesting Mrs. Crawford had a legal obligation to force her husband to take an interest in her work. A faint murmur of amusement rippled through the courtroom. Even the court reporter's lips twitched slightly. Richard leaned forward, his control visibly slipping. She has accounts, multiple accounts I knew nothing about. Perhaps, the judge observed dryly, because you were too busy establishing accounts of your own that she knew nothing about. Accounts currently under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission? Richard blanched. His attorney quickly interjected, Your Honor, those allegations are not relevant to these proceedings and are part of a separate legal matter that has not been adjudicated. Judge Davidson fixed him with a stern look. Mr. Winters, when a party's credibility regarding financial disclosures is at issue, an ongoing SEC investigation for financial impropriety is absolutely relevant. The hearing continued with Richard, growing increasingly agitated as each of his attorney's arguments was methodically dismantled by Eleanor's meticulous preparation. His assertion that I'd been hiding assets was countered with documentation showing every account, every investment, every business transaction, all properly recorded and disclosed in my financial declaration. By contrast, Richard's financial disclosure was riddled with omissions and inconsistencies that Eleanor highlighted with surgical precision. Accounts missing, properties not listed, transfers unexplained. Your Honor, Eleanor said, rising for her concluding statement, what we have here is a textbook case of financial misconduct. Mr. Crawford attempted to drain joint accounts in the middle of the night, has failed to disclose substantial assets in his financial declaration, and is currently under investigation for using marital assets to fund unauthorized activities, both personal and professional. We request that the asset freeze remain in place, that Mr. Crawford be ordered to provide complete financial disclosure within 48 hours, and that interim support be established to provide Mrs. Crawford with living expenses during these proceedings. The judge nodded, making notes before looking up. Mr. Winters, your response? Richard's attorney seemed to recognize the futility of further argument. We request additional time for financial disclosure, Your Honor. Given the complexity of my client's assets and the current restrictions on his accounts. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow, Judge Davidson ruled firmly. A full financial disclosure is to be filed with the court, with copies provided to opposing counsel. Regarding interim support, that won't be necessary, Your Honor. I spoke for Biao. The first time, my voice steady. I have sufficient resources to support myself during these proceedings. Richard's head snapped up, his expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. This wasn't the desperate, financially dependent wife he'd expected to face. The judge nodded. Very well. The asset freeze will remain in place until complete financial disclosure has been provided and verified. We're adjourned until further notice. As the court rose, Richard tried to approach me, but Eleanor smoothly intercepted him. Any communication should go through counsel, Richard. You know the protocol. This isn't over, Evelyn, he hissed, just loudly enough for me to hear. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming. I met his gaze calmly. Actually, Richard, I've spent years anticipating what's coming. That's the difference between us. His face contorted with barely controlled rage as his attorney pulled him away, whispering urgently in his ear. I watched them leave, feeling not triumph but a strange sense of clarity, as though I was seeing the true Richard clearly for the first time, without the filters of hope or denial that had colored my perception for 15 years. Eleanor guided me through the private exit, skillfully avoiding the waiting reporters. That went exactly as planned, she observed as we slid into her waiting car. Richard's outburst did him no favors with Judge Davidson. He's always been his own worst enemy when his control is threatened, I replied. It's what makes him effective in negotiated settlements. People give him what he wants to avoid his volatility. But in a courtroom, it makes him look unhinged, Eleanor finished with satisfaction, especially compared to your composure. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. Fallout beginning at the firm. 3 partners have called emergency meetings with clients. Are attempting to access building, denied entry again. I shared the update with Eleanor, who nodded thoughtfully. The professional consequences are accelerating. That will make him more desperate in the divorce proceedings. Which is exactly why we prepared so thoroughly, I reminded her. Richard cornered is Richard at his most dangerous. As if to confirm my assessment, my phone lit up with a call from Martin Palmer. Richard showed up at the office with private security, he reported without preamble, demanding access to his files and threatening to sue the firm for wrongful termination. Security had to escort him out. How did the executive committee respond? I asked. They voted to begin formal disassociation proceedings, Martin replied. The firm's reputation can't weather this kind of scandal if we appear to be protecting him. This was moving even faster than Eleanor and I had anticipated. The firm cutting ties with Richard would deprive him of his primary income source and professional identity in one stroke. There's more, Martin continued. Claire has agreed to cooperate with the SEC investigation in exchange for immunity. She's providing details about Richard's financial activities that even I wasn't aware of. Self-preservation, I murmured. She's throwing him under the bus to save herself. Precisely, Martin agreed. And in doing so, revealing the extent of Richard's misconduct. The apartment was just the beginning. There are offshore accounts, shell companies, client funds diverted through complex schemes. I exchanged glances with Eleanor, whose expression had grown serious. This is moving beyond divorce territory into potential criminal charges, she observed after I relayed Martin's information. That was never my intention, I said truthfully. Perhaps not, Eleanor acknowledged, but Richard's choices have set these consequences in motion, not yours. My phone buzzed with another notification, this one from the security system at our apartment. Richard had returned, this time with what appeared to be a moving crew. He's violating the restraining order, Eleanor noted, watching the video feed over my shoulder. Attempting to remove property despite the asset freeze. Call the police, I instructed, and activate Protocol 4. Protocol 4 was our contingency. Plan for exactly this scenario. Richard attempting to remove or destroy marital assets in defiance of court orders. Within minutes, a private security team Eleanor had on standby would arrive at the apartment to document everything Richard took, while the police would respond to enforce the restraining order. As Eleanor made the necessary calls, I watched Richard, directing the movers to specific items, artwork, electronics, his designer wardrobe. His movements were frantic, his gestures erratic, as though he was racing against time. He knows this is his last chance, I observed. Once the police arrive, he won't be able to access the apartment again without court permission. And he's creating a perfect record of contempt charges, Eleanor added, ending her call. Police. Are 3 minutes out. Security team is already in the lobby. I continued watching as Richard became increasingly agitated, barking orders at the confused movers who were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. When the buzzer sounded, announcing the arrival of the police, Richard's face contorted with fury. He gestured wildly, urging the movers to work faster. The police entered moments later, accompanied by our private security team. The confrontation was brief but intense, Richard arguing, gesticulating, ultimately being handcuffed when he refused to comply with their orders. The movers, now aware they had been enlisted in potentially illegal activity, quickly abandoned their work and cooperated with the authorities. My security team documented everything, capturing Richard being escorted from the building in handcuffs, evidence that would prove devastating in our next court appearance. He's self-destructing faster than anticipated, Eleanor noted, a hint of professional admiration in her tone. The criminal charges for violating the restraining order will give us additional leverage in the divorce settlement. I felt no satisfaction watching Richard's humiliation, only a weary resolution that this chapter of my life was finally closing. What happens now? I asked. Richard will likely be released on his own recognizance, but with strict conditions, Eleanor explained. The violation will be reported to Judge Davidson, who will not be pleased. His attorney will try to mitigate the damage, but the photographic evidence is irrefutable. Meanwhile, we continue preparing for full financial disclosure and the division of assets. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. You've destroyed everything I built. This war is just beginning. RI showed the message to Eleanor, who immediately documented it as evidence of potential harassment. He never learns, does he? She observed. Every action just strengthens our position. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Reports from the police confirming Richard's arrest for violating the restraining order. Updates from Martin about the firm's accelerating efforts to distance itself from Richard. Calls from financial institutions verifying asset freezes and reporting Richard's increasingly desperate attempts to access accounts. By evening, I sat alone in my hotel suite, watching the sunset paint Manhattan's skyline in golden hues. My phone had finally fallen silent after the day's constant barrage of updates and alerts. In the stillness, I allowed myself to truly feel, not the vindication I might have expected, but a profound sense of liberation. For 15 years, I had progressively diminished myself to fit within the narrow constraints of Richard's expectations. I had muted my intelligence, hidden my ambitions, suppressed my natural confidence, all to preserve a marriage that, in retrospect, had begun dying the moment Richard decided my success threatened his ego. My phone buzzed one final time, a news alert. Richard's arrest was now public, tied to the SEC investigation in a breaking story about alleged financial impropriety at prestigious law firm. His professional reputation, the thing he valued above all else, was irrevocably damaged. Another text arrived, this one from Eleanor. Judge Davidson scheduled emergency hearing for tomorrow, 8 a.m. Richard to appear in person to explain restraining order violation. I texted back, "Will attend." Although I could have sent an attorney in my place, I wanted to be present, not out of vindictiveness, but to finally close this chapter with clear eyes and full awareness. I had spent too many years looking away, making excuses, pretending not to see what was right in front of me. The final hearing came sooner than anyone expected. Richard's financial disclosure, when finally produced under threat of contempt charges, revealed the full extent of his deception. Hidden accounts, misappropriated client funds, assets concealed through an elaborate network of shell companies. The SEC investigation had expanded to include criminal charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, and embezzlement. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the firm's complete abandonment, Richard finally agreed to settlement terms that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. full financial disclosure, equitable division of legitimate marital assets, no claims against my business or personal accounts, no further contact except through attorneys. As we sat in Judge Davidson's chambers for the final settlement conference, Richard looked nothing like the confident, controlling man I had married. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. The arrogant smirk had been replaced by a tightness around his mouth that spoke of barely contained bitterness. "Before we conclude," Judge Davidson said, reviewing the settlement documents, "I want to ensure both parties understand the terms they're agreeing to." "Mrs. Crawford?" "I understand and accept the terms, Your Honor," I confirmed. "Mr. Crawford?" Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might launch into one final tirade, one last attempt to assert control or assign blame. Instead, he simply nodded. "I understand." "Very well," the judge continued. "Given the circumstances and the comprehensive nature of this settlement, I see no reason not to grant the divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences, effective immediately." With the stroke of a pen, 15 years of marriage ended. Not with dramatic declarations or emotional confrontations, but with the quiet finality of legal documents. As we rose to leave, Richard finally spoke directly to me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You planned this all along, didn't you? Just waiting for the right moment to destroy me." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Richard. I plan to protect myself, not to destroy you. You did that all on your own." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "You could have just asked for a divorce like a normal person instead of this orchestrated humiliation." "Would you have agreed to a fair settlement?" I asked quietly. "Would you have disclosed all your assets honestly? Would you have respected my business and my financial independence?" His silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I said. "Goodbye, Richard." Outside the courthouse, Eleanor waited until Richard and his attorney had departed before turning to me. "Congratulations. You're officially divorced, with your assets and business intact. What will you do now?" I looked out at the city, my city, stretching before me with possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider for years. "First, I'm going to reclaim my professional identity. No more hiding behind shell companies and maiden names. Winters Financial Consulting will operate in the open, with me as its visible CEO." Eleanor smiled. "And personally? I'm going to remember who I was before I started shrinking myself to make Richard comfortable," I replied honestly. "The woman who graduated top of her class at Wharton, the analyst who outperformed everyone at Morgan Stanley, the person who never needed Richard's approval to be exceptional." 3 months later, I sat in my new office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The glass walls and modern decor reflected the transparent, forward-thinking ethos of my now thriving consulting firm. On my desk sat the day's financial news, featuring a small item about Richard Crawford pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations. Martin Palmer had called earlier that morning, seeking to engage my firm's services for the restructured remains of his law practice. Claire had filed for divorce shortly after the scandal broke, taking a significant portion of their assets in a settlement that Martin didn't contest. "Karma works in mysterious ways," Mira observed, placing a new client folder on my desk. "Not mysterious," I corrected her gently. "Just inevitable. When you build a life on deception, it eventually collapses under its own weight." My phone buzzed. With a calendar reminder, dinner with the board of the Douglas Foundation, now one of my most prominent clients. They had sought me out directly after learning of my role in their financial strategy, offering me a board position that I had accepted, after careful consideration. As I gathered my things to leave, I paused at the window, reflecting on the journey of the past year. The woman Richard had dismissed as merely decorative now managed assets worth billions, The business he had mocked as a little hobby now employed 27 professionals. The wife he had underestimated had not only survived his betrayal, but emerged stronger for having endured it. I felt no lingering bitterness, no desire for further retribution. Richard's downfall hadn't been my goal, merely the inevitable consequence of his own choices colliding with my refusal to remain a victim. In the end, the most powerful revenge hadn't been revealing my hidden fortune or exposing his deception. It had been reclaiming my authentic self, the woman who had always been there, waiting patiently behind the carefully constructed facade of Richard Crawford's wife. That woman was now free, moving forward into a future limited only by her own choices, not by the constraints of someone else's expectations. And that was worth more than all the hidden fortunes in the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe.